My name is Lydia Moreau. I am 63 years old, a retired seamstress who spent her entire life stitching hems for other families while quietly unraveling on my own. I once believed silence could hold a household together, that if I kept my head down, if I cooked every Friday meal, if I asked for nothing, I would never be left behind. I was wrong. From now on, Mom, your paycheck goes straight to my account. You don't need anything anyway. That is what my son, Ethan, said to me that afternoon. He did not raise his voice. He did not look ashamed. He stirred his coffee as if he were offering me convenience, as if I were a burden needing management. I looked at him across my own kitchen table, and I quietly agreed. That night, like every Friday for the past 3 years, Ethan and his wife Clara arrived without calling. They never knocked. They came with familiar confidence, expecting dinner to be warm and ready the way birds expect a feeder to be filled. I listened to their footsteps moving toward the living room. Then I heard it. A scream, sharp, disbelieving, because the couch was gone. The television was gone. The wedding rug they once trampled with their shoes was gone. Everything they believed would always be waiting for them, gone. Only my silence remained. Only the echo of their shock filled the room. I did not rush to explain. I did not apologize. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around my teacup, breathing in the quiet I had not tasted in years. They did not understand it yet, but I had not sold my furniture for money. I had removed it for clarity. Because before my son tried to take my paycheck, he had already taken something far greater. He had taken the permission to decide what I needed. He had taken the certainty that I would never walk away. And so I asked myself, a question that no mother ever wants to face. When a mother stops setting the table, is she still a mother? Or has she simply stopped being the meal? I did not have the answer yet, but that night I knew one thing with painful certainty. They expected dinner. What they received was absence. I was not always a woman of silence. There was a time when my laughter filled hallways, when I believed that kindness was a form of protection, and that love, if poured generously enough, could hold a home together. My name is Lydia Moreau, born in a mill town in Pennsylvania, raised among women who survived by endurance rather than applause. I never stood out in a crowd, and I never needed to. I took pride in being dependable, in making things last. Marriages, meals, fabric, hope. I married young, at 22. My husband, Daniel, was a mechanic with grease-stained hands and a quiet soul. He never brought me roses, but every winter he warmed my car before dawn. We were not romantic in the ways movies teach, but we were steady. We understood that love was not always spoken. Sometimes it was packed in lunch boxes or sewn into hems. When Ethan was born, I felt an anchor drop in my life. One child, one boy with chestnut hair like mine. From the moment I held him, I made a silent promise. Not that I would give him the world, but that I would shield him from it. I did not know that promise would one day bend into a burden. At 38, I lost Daniel, a heart attack in the back of the garage. They said he didn't suffer. I did. Not in screams, but in the hollow way silence follows you through a house that still smells like motor oil and morning coffee. I was 38 and already a widow. Ethan was 14. That was the year I learned how elastic a mother's spine could be. I took 2 jobs. By day, I hemmed suits in a department store alteration room, my fingers pricked by needles more times than I can count. At night, I cleaned offices, vacuuming hallways long after the world had gone to sleep. My hands grew old before my face did. I slept 4 hours a night, ate toast over the sink, and paid bills on kitchen napkins. But I never let Ethan see the hunger in me. He had field trips, sneakers, tutoring. I signed every permission slip, some of them with tears on the edge of the paper. When he asked why I never sat down for dinner, I said I wasn't hungry. The truth was, I did not know how to feed myself when there was only me left to feed. Many people believe sacrifice is loud. I know now it can be so quiet it erases you. There are 3 objects I have carried with me for decades. A white porcelain teapot chipped on the spout, which Daniel bought at a yard sale because he said it looked like Sundays. A hand-sewn lace table runner, every stitch made during nights I waited for Ethan to come home from high school, and a wooden box with a brass clasp, holding all the birthday cards Ethan wrote me as a child. Cards with crooked hearts and words like, "Mommy is the best cooker." I opened that box only on difficult nights. The woman who raised Ethan lives in those papers. The man who stands before me today does not. People often ask, when did things change? They expect a moment, a fight, an injury. But that is not how erosion works. Rivers don't announce when they begin to carve stone. My undoing came in small withdrawals. A forgotten thank you. A missed birthday. A voice that started calling me mom the same way one addresses a service provider. Perhaps it began the first time Ethan came home from college and asked what was for dinner instead of how I was doing. Or the first time he visited with Clara and she complained that my sofa hurt her back. I remember answering softly, "It's the same one you napped on when you were 5. She shrugged. "People upgrade, Lydia." Upgrade. As if love had a newer model. Still, I said nothing. I offered tea, set the table, kept the lace runner clean, even when they pushed plates across it without care. I told myself a story I had embroidered over years. If I stay kind, he will remember I am his mother. I believed. Silence was glue. I did not see it becoming permission. Working 2 jobs for 25 years does something to your body. My knees crack when I climb stairs. My fingers, calloused from sewing, struggle to open jars. Still, I never asked Ethan for help. Pride? Perhaps. Or fear that if I asked, and he said no, the final thread between us would snap. When Ethan married Clara, I waited for my place in their life. I bought a pale blue dress for the wedding, sat 3 rows back because seats near the aisle were reserved for friends from his firm. I convinced myself it did not matter. I told myself, as long as there is a chair for me somewhere, I am still part of his life. But that is how women like me disappear. Not in flames, but in corners. If you had told me then that one day he would ask for my paycheck, I would have laughed. Ethan was raised on my lap. He once cried because he broke the handle of my teapot. He begged me to fix it someday. He promised me he would build me a porch when I got old. He forgot. Or maybe he never meant it in the first place. I began to notice the way he spoke to me changed. Fewer questions, more instructions. "Mom, pay this bill. Mom, you don't need to drive anymore. Mom, I'll take care of things." Some would call that care, but there is a difference between shielding and steering, between helping and holding a leash. I told myself again and again, I thought, if I stayed silent, I could keep my son. It became a prayer. It became a lie. I remember the night it cracked. I invited them for dinner. I roasted chicken, his favorite. He arrived late. Clara scrolled through her phone and said, "Lydia, you really should replace that rug." Ethan chewed and said nothing. "No, thank you. No, how are you? Just, we should talk about your finances soon." My fork paused. Something inside me, small and long neglected, sat up. That was before the sentence, before the coffee, before the demand for my paycheck, before the scream in the empty room. I am telling you this because no mother wakes up one day and decides to close the door on her only child. It is not anger. It is not vengeance. It is the slow recognition that if I did not draw a boundary, I would vanish completely. People see the moment I emptied my living room and think that was the beginning. It was not. That was the answer. The question began long ago, in a room lit by a single lamp, when I held a lace runner I had stitched for a table where no one waited. I am Lydia Moreau, and before I lost my son, I almost lost myself. There is a peculiar kind of routine that forms when love turns into obligation. It rarely begins with a decision. Rather, it creeps in through repetition, softening your resistance until what once felt like a favor becomes an expectation. That is how the Friday dinners began. It started 3 years ago. Ethan and Clara arrived unannounced one evening, saying they were in the neighborhood. I had just finished cooking vegetable soup and cornbread. They sat, ate, and left. They thanked me, briefly, almost absently. The following week, they came again, and the next. Soon, Fridays were no longer mine. They never asked, "Is this a good time, Mom?" Instead, they said, "We'll be there at 7." It sounded like certainty, not a request. I began planning my groceries around them. I bought Clara's preferred sparkling water, Ethan's favorite roast. I lit candles I rarely lit for myself. I set the lace runner, the same one she once called dated, down the center of the table. I folded napkins the way I did when Daniel was still alive. Part of me told myself this was love. Another part wondered if it was performance. "What's for dinner, Mom?" That was Ethan's greeting every Friday. No kiss on the cheek, no "how are you feeling?" Just the assumption that something warm was waiting. Clara, light on affection and heavy on commentary, often wandered through the living room before we ate. She would trail her fingers across my shelves, pausing at framed photos. "You should upgrade your TV, Lydia. That model is almost antique." I would nod softly. "It still works," she would shrug. "Just because something works doesn't mean it fits." They never brought anything. Not bread, not dessert, not even flowers. Instead, Clara occasionally walked into my kitchen, opened my refrigerator and said, "You're low on fresh produce. I'll make a list for you next time." The painful truth was, I didn't protest. I brewed tea, I carried dishes, I remembered Ethan's favorite sauces. I filled their plates as though I were feeding something hungry inside myself. I feared that if I stopped hosting those dinners, I would lose the last thread that tied my son to me. Yet I noticed the small wounds, the way Clara scrolled her phone during grace, the way Ethan sat with one arm slung over the chair as if the room belonged to him. They spoke to each other more than to me, about weekend trips, new restaurants, gym schedules. I became a background presence, something assumed. I told myself this was what motherhood meant, that it was my role to remain, even when unacknowledged. But a question began to trouble me. If love is not noticed, is it still love, or does it become service? Once I asked Ethan, "Would you like to help set the table?" Without looking up from his phone, he replied, "You've always done it, Mom." It was neither an insult nor kindness. It was worse. It was a dismissal. There were no arguments, no shouting, just the erosion of regard. One Friday after they left, I remained seated at the table long after the dishes cooled. There were 3 crumbs on Ethan's plate and gravy smears on Clara's. I stared at the half-empty teapot in the center of the table. I realized then I didn't remember the last time either of them had asked me if I was tired. Still, the next week, I cooked again. I suppose I feared the alternative more than I feared the burden. Silence, when you are alone, can be deafening. It echoes the question, would anyone notice if I stopped existing? So I filled my house with steam, salt, and sugar. Foolish as it sounds, I believed feeding them might feed me too. There were, however, moments I could not ignore. One rainy Friday, my right knee throbbed so badly I could barely stand. I placed a chair by the stove, stirring soup while seated. When Ethan and Clara entered, I offered a worn-out smile. Clara glanced at my leg and asked, "Did you sprain something?" "No," I said. "It's just age." She laughed lightly. "Well, you should consider hiring help. You can't keep up forever." Not once did either offer to carry a dish. It was around that time I began noticing how their habits shifted. They arrived emptier and left fuller, as though I were a stop on a route of convenience. Sometimes they asked me to pack leftovers. Ethan opened my pantry and took crackers for the road. They left lights on, chairs out of place, crumbs on the counter. But the greatest wound was not the mess. It was the casual certainty that I would tidy it. I began to realize that love without reciprocity does not remain love. It becomes an assumption. An assumption, when fed long enough, grows into entitlement. I asked myself quietly at the sink one night, soap bubbles trembling over my hands, if my silence allows this, am I not part of the harm? Yet I feared confrontation. What if speaking broke what little remained? What if demanding kindness drove him away? Mothers are taught to endure, to wait, to believe in the long arc of gratitude. We are told one day they will appreciate you. But what if that day never comes? What if waiting becomes erosion? The following Fridays blurred together. I no longer marked time by dates but by menus. Roast chicken, baked potatoes, green beans, laughter that did not include me. A dishwasher filled with plates I did not soil. But every act of quiet suffering writes a crack. Mine deepened the night Ethan used my car without asking. He returned it with gas, half gone. When I mentioned it gently, he sighed. "Mom, don't be petty." Petty. A word that landed on my chest like a stone. I returned that night to the wooden box on my nightstand. I opened it and touched a birthday card Ethan made when he was 7. Inside, in crooked letters, it read, "Thank you for making everything." I whispered to myself, barely audible, when did making become expected? Still, I said nothing. I poured tea. I waited for gratitude that never arrived. To this day, I cannot say the exact Friday that built the quiet anger inside me. There was no single straw, only the accumulation of assumptions. They believed I would never change. They were almost right. I used to believe that betrayal came with noise, that it arrived like thunder, unmistakable and violent. But the truth is, the first crack in trust is almost always quiet. It slips in through something ordinary, a letter, a question, a number that doesn't add up. Mine arrived on a Tuesday morning, folded neatly inside a white envelope, sealed with a logo I had trusted for over 20 years. I remember standing at the mailbox, still wearing my robe, the morning sun barely warming the pavement. I flipped through the usual stack of advertisements and utility statements when I saw it. A notice of late payment on a credit card I did not recognize. At first, I thought it must be a clerical error. I had never owned more than one card. I did not buy extravagantly. I did not forget the due dates. Inside, the wording was cold. Past due, $173.42. Please make immediate payment to avoid penalties. I sat at the kitchen table, glasses perched on my nose, reading it again and again. My hands trembled, though not from age. There was something invasive about it, like finding a stranger's shoes at your bedside. I picked up the phone and dialed the customer service number listed at the bottom of the letter. After several holds, a woman with a practiced voice said, "Mrs. Moreau, this card was opened 18 months ago." "Impossible," I replied. "I never opened it." "Perhaps a joint account? A family member?" she suggested politely. My throat tightened. No, I would know. She hesitated, then added, "There were multiple charges at home improvement stores, furniture outlets, fairly consistent spending." Furniture, paint, hardware. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in silence. There was only one person who had keys to my house, one person who had recently renovated his home, one person who once said, "Mom, I'll put it on my card, don't worry." And I, foolishly grateful for the help, had believed him. But still, I tried to doubt myself. Had I signed something unknowingly? Was this my fault somehow? A lapse in memory? I searched my drawers, my purse, and my desk. I found nothing. No paperwork, no receipts, no authorization. I told myself, this must be a mistake. But a deeper voice whispered, "Mistakes don't leave paint in someone else's hallway." That night, I barely slept. The letter lay on my nightstand like an unwelcome guest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's face at my table, casually lifting my purse to fetch my keys. He had done it 100 times. I had never questioned him. 2 days later, another envelope arrived, this time from my bank. My heart sank before I even opened it. Recent withdrawal, $1,400. Branch location, Willow Creek, 16 miles from primary residence. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. I had not driven that far in months. I avoid highways ever since Daniel died. My withdrawals were always local, always modest. Yet this one was in my name, with my card. On a day I distinctly remembered being somewhere else entirely. The hospital. It was 3 months. Go. I was admitted overnight for pneumonia. Ethan had come to visit, bringing me chamomile tea and sitting quietly by my bed. I thanked him. I had cried even, telling him I was grateful I still had a son who cared. He had reached into my purse to check my phone. "Rest, Mom," he said. "I'll handle things." handle things. I rose from the table and walked to my bedroom, my legs unsteady. I opened the wooden box, my box of memory and proof of gentler times. The birthday cards, the crooked drawings, the promises written in crayon. "I will protect you forever, Mommy." The irony hollowed me. I whispered into the air, as if he might somehow hear me through time. If this is a mistake, why does my heart feel so certain it is not? For several days, I kept everything hidden. I folded the bank notice and tucked it beneath the teapot on my counter, as though steam might dissolve it. I could not bring myself to confront Ethan, not yet. I needed to be sure. About the facts, yes, but more painfully, about the truth. Was this theft, or was it desperation? Was it malice, or entitlement? Did he think I wouldn't notice? Or worse, that I would notice and stay silent anyway? I needed one more confirmation. So on a Thursday morning, I dressed carefully, brushed my hair, and took the early bus to the bank. I asked to speak with a manager. My hands shook only slightly as I placed the withdrawal slip between us. "I did not make this transaction," I said, "and I need to know how it happened." She examined it, typing swiftly. "It was made with your debit card, Mrs. Moreau." "My card has never left my possession," I replied. She looked at me then with an expression I recognized, not disbelief, but pity. "Sometimes," she said gently, "family members overstep. It happens more often than you might think." I felt my cheeks flush with shame, not at her words, but at the realization that what I had dismissed as fatigue, forgetfulness, coincidence, might be something far darker. I walked home slowly, carrying nothing but the sound of my own footsteps. The autumn air was crisp, leaves scattering like things once attached, now breaking free. I reached my front door and paused. Inside, my house looked the same. Teapot, table, framed photographs, all in place, except me. I was not where I had been. I sat down and placed both envelopes on the table. I stared at them not as paper, but as crossroads. If I pretended they were mistakes, I could preserve the illusion. I could cook Friday dinner. I could swallow this and serve roast chicken with a smile. But if I acknowledged them as truth, everything would change. I was not afraid of losing money. I was afraid of losing the story I had told myself, that Ethan's love, though quiet, was intact. But love does not take without asking. Love does not open credit lines in someone else's name. I closed my eyes and saw him at 14, crying when his bicycle broke. I fixed it. I always fixed it. But this was not a broken chain. This was a broken vow. I folded my hands and said, not aloud but with absolute clarity, "I will not fix this for him." It was the first time I chose myself over my silence. For 3 days, I moved through my house like a guest in unfamiliar rooms. I cooked out of habit, cleaned without thought, and kept the 2 envelopes tucked under the teapot as if their weight could be hidden beneath porcelain. I did not confront Ethan. I did not tell a soul. But silence had begun to turn against me, no longer a shelter but a pressure I could not exhale. On the 4th morning, I found myself standing in front of Marjorie Thorne's door. Marjorie has been my neighbor for 35 years. She is 71, lean as a willow branch, with silver hair always tied in a knot and eyes that miss nothing. We used to share coffee on Sundays back when both our husbands were alive. After their deaths, our conversations thinned into nods across driveways. Grief isolates even among the grieving. I didn't plan to tell her, I only meant to return her pie dish. But when she opened the door and saw my face, she stepped aside without a word and I walked in. Her house is smaller than mine, tidier. Family photos line the wall, but none of her son. The absence was once a wound she tried to hide. Now it sits openly, like a scar she no longer bothers to conceal. "Sit down, Lydia," she said, her voice the kind that brooks no argument. "I'll put on tea." I sat at her kitchen table, fingers tracing the rim of the dish I had brought. I could feel the confession rising in me like steam, desperate for escape. When she returned with the teapot, I heard myself say, "I received a letter." I told her everything. The credit card, the withdrawal, the timing of the hospital visit, Ethan's request for my paycheck. I did not cry as I spoke. My voice was steady, almost detached, like someone reading from a newspaper. But when I finished, I noticed my hands were clenched in fists. Marjorie listened without interruption. When I stopped, she lifted her cup, took a slow sip, and nodded once. I hoped it was a mistake, I whispered. A misunderstanding. Something we could fix. She set her cup down with a soft click. I used to say the same thing, she replied. I used to tell myself he wouldn't do that to me, not on purpose. Her eyes drifted to the wall, to the space where a photograph once hung. I believed my son was just careless, that he'd straighten out. I excused every missing dollar, every lie. I even paid his debts to protect his name. She folded her hands carefully, as if holding something fragile. Do you know when I stopped defending him? I shook my head. When the bank called, she said. He had taken out a loan against my house. I nearly lost it. The house my husband built with his hands. And do you know what I said to myself? She looked at me then, her gaze sharp as winter air. I said surely he didn't mean harm. Even then I defended him. Even then. A silence settled between us, not empty but dense, woven with recognition. Two mothers each holding evidence against the child they once protected. Marjorie continued, softer now. No one warns you about this part of motherhood. They tell you to sacrifice, to forgive, to endure, but they never tell you what to do when endurance becomes erased. My breath caught. She leaned forward. Let me tell you something, Lydia. A mother's heart may be a home, but even a home needs walls, and even a bank needs a lock. The words struck something in me, a truth I had long kept buried. I had believed that love meant access, unlimited access, but access without respect is not love. It is trespass. My vision blurred. It wasn't Ethan I wept for. It was myself. For all the times I handed over my strength and called it devotion. For all the times I mistook surrender for kindness. Marjorie did not offer me tissues. She did not reach across the table. She let me cry because she understood that some tears are not for comfort but for cleansing. When I could speak again, I whispered, I keep thinking, maybe if I had said no sooner. She shook her head gently. Mothers always think timing is the sin. It isn't. The sin is believing we are not allowed to close the door. I looked at her then, truly looked. This woman had already walked the path I was entering. She had lost more than money. She had lost the illusion that love and harm could not coexist. Her voice softened. You are not cruel for protecting yourself, Lydia. You are only late. And late is not too late. Those words settled into me quietly, anchoring themselves. Not too late. Not too late. I reached into my purse and removed the two envelopes, the credit letter and the bank notice. I laid them flat on her table. She read them without flinching. Finally, she asked, What will you do? I stared at the papers, at my name printed in black beside debts I had not made. I did not yet know the full answer, but for the first time in years, I knew what I would not do. I will not pretend, I said. Marjorie nodded, satisfied. She lifted the teapot and poured me another cup. Good, start there. We sat in silence. Two women bound not by tragedy, but by awakening. When I returned home, I did not put the letters back under the teapot. I placed them in the wooden box beside Ethan's childhood cards. Past and present pressed together, waiting for whatever would come next. That night, I did something I had not done in a long time. I locked my front door. Not out of fear, but out of recognition. A bank needs a lock. Marjorie's words did not leave me. A bank needs a lock. I carried that line around the house like a new set of keys, testing which doors it fit. It turned silently in places I had left open. For years, not angry, not vengeful, simply closed. I began where any seamstress would begin, with measuring. I stood in my living room and measured what had become invisible through routine. The couch that sagged in the center where Ethan always sat with one leg on the armrest. The television Clara said was outdated. the buffet Daniel and I bought at a church sale, its drawers lined with fading contact paper. I touched each piece and asked a question I had avoided for too long. What would my son actually lose if the things he assumed would always be here were not? I did not need the money, not for groceries, not for bills. The sale would be a message written in the language Ethan understood best. Presence and absence, supply and demand, the opposite of a lecture, a demonstration. I began with the sofa. A woman from a nearby town answered my listing. She arrived in a dented pickup with a friend and a roll of bungee cords. She ran her palm along the fabric, testing the seams, the way I used to test dresses for customers who wanted the waist taken in without seeing the stitches. She said the couch was sturdy and fair-priced. I nodded without explaining its history. I was not selling a confession. I was clearing a stage. They lifted the couch, laughing at how heavy it was. The laughter echoed through the room, light and unfamiliar. For a second, I almost told them to stop. Not because I loved the couch, but because the sound felt too bright for a choice so sober. They strapped it in the truck, thanked me twice, and drove away. The room fell into a new shape. I sat on the floor where the couch had been and watched the groove in the carpet slowly rise. It felt like watching a bruise fade, which is to say, not instant and not painless. 2 days later, a young couple came for the television. He checked the ports on the back. She asked if the remote worked. They smiled when I handed them extra batteries. When they left, I stood before the blank rectangle of wall. My reflection in the dark glass had been replaced by paint the color of bone. I caught myself lifting the remote anyway, pointing it in my absence, and almost laughed. Habit is a form of hope, even when hope is misplaced. The last to go was the buffet. The buyer was a teacher who wanted storage for a classroom reading book. She traced the edge of the top with her finger and asked about the faint ring where a plant had once sat. I told her it had been a fern. For the first time that week, memory rose up with its old gentleness. Daniel and I had polished this piece together on a summer night, windows open, radio low. We saved for it. We paid cash. We brought it home like a prize we did not win, but earned. When she offered to pay in 2 installments, I said yes, without thinking. Not because I needed to accommodate her budget, but because something in me wanted that piece to leave kindly. It had anchored more than plates. It had anchored a season of my life when love was work and work was love. When it rolled toward the door on a dolly, books sliding in the drawers like secret passengers, I placed my hand on its surface and whispered thank you. The teacher did not hear. The furniture did. By the end of the week, the living room was a large square of quiet. There were indentations in the carpet where legs had stood for years, like footprints pointing to the door. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the clock in the hallway. I brewed tea and carried the cup in both hands to the doorway, as if bringing an offering to a place of worship. Perhaps I was, the altar of decision. The absence did not feel like a loss. It felt like air. For the first time in months, I could breathe without curating anyone else's comfort. The room was not pretty. It was honest. That night, I sat on a dining chair I had moved into the living room and asked myself the question that mattered. If nothing in this room belongs to Ethan, would he still come? If he came, would he sit with me? Would he ask about my week? Would he bring bread or flowers or even just the habit of gratitude? Or would he stare at the blank space and demand replacement? What would he mourn? The furniture or the control? It is a strange relief to take a test that requires no one else's permission. I did not call to warn him. I did not announce a boundary. I simply set a table of absence and waited to see who would sit with me there. Evening fell slowly. Streetlights clicked on. I washed the few dishes I had used that day and dried them with a towel that once belonged to my mother. I brushed the fringe of the lace runner and folded it carefully. I did not put it on the table. Not tonight. The runner is a promise of gathering. I no longer promised what I was not receiving. I brewed one more pot of tea, chamomile with honey, and turned off the kitchen light. In the dim, the house felt like a photograph from years ago before clutter and after grief. A stripped room can be cruel. It can also be accurate. Marjorie called to check on me. I told her it was done. She did not ask if I was afraid. She knows fear is not the point. She only said, "Key, good. Let the room tell the truth." After I hung up, I sat with my notebook and wrote a sentence I had never allowed on paper. Not a threat, not a plea. If he loves me, he will miss me, not my furniture. It was not a revelation. It was a standard. I went to bed early, not from exhaustion, but from resolve. In the dark, I thought of the first crib we assembled for Ethan, the tiny dresser with drawer pulls shaped like stars. I thought of the day he moved out, the way I folded his towels and placed them in a box, tucking a note between them that said, "Call me when you arrive." He did not call. He texted the next day, a single word, settled. I had helped my son settle into a life where I was optional. Now I was choosing to be essential to myself. Friday came. I cooked, but barely. A small pot of rice, steamed broccoli. Nothing that could be mistaken for a feast. The table remained plain. No candles, no runner, no centerpieces for people who forgot to look up. I poured tea and sat. The kettle clicked as it cooled, a sound I had learned to hear as company. The key turned in the lock at 7. Familiar. Predictable. Their footsteps crossed the threshold like a script they believed could not be revised. Clara reached the living room first. The silence that followed was not empty. It was a bell. I did not move. I did not explain. I took a slow sip of tea and let the heat settle in my chest. This was not a game. It was not a punishment. It was a question placed in a room. What do you value here? In the past, when faced with injury, I had always stitched quietly, closing the seam so neatly no one could see it had ever split. Tonight, I set down the needle. I chose to let the tears show. I chose to let silence speak its full sentence. I had started the war I did not want by refusing to be on the battlefield. I did not stand up when they entered. I remained at the kitchen table, tea in hand, as if nothing had changed. Because in truth, nothing essential had. The room was bare, yes, but absence does not erase the truth. It exposes it. The first sound was Clara's sharp intake of breath, then, "What in God's name? Lydia!" Her voice cracked the silence like a dropped plate. Footsteps rushed across the hardwood, frantic, disbelieving. I heard Ethan's shoes drag against the floorboards, as though his feet did not trust the space beneath him. "Mom!" he shouted from the living room. "Mom, what did you do? Where is everything?" I took another sip of tea. He appeared in the doorway, eyes wide, confusion wrestling with fury. He looked not at me, but at the emptiness behind me. Clara hovered at his shoulder, arms crossed, mouth open in theatrical outrage. "Where's the sofa?" he demanded, voice rising. "Where's the TV? The buffet? Mom, what have you done?" I set my cup down gently. "I cleaned." He stared at me as though I had spoken in a foreign language. "Cleaned? Cleaned? This looks ransacked." Clara stepped forward. "This is selfish, Lydia. We come here every week. For you. For me." That sentence hovered in the air like smoke, revealing what it concealed. They had not said, "We visit you." They said, "We come." For you. As though my house were a service, as though my presence were incidental to their ritual of consumption. I rose slowly. My knees protested, but my resolve did not. I walked to the threshold, between kitchen and living room. There I stood, where Daniel once stood to kiss my forehead each night. The living room was a blank page now. No couch, no polished wood, only floor, walls, and the echo of expectation. Ethan's face reddened. "This isn't funny. What did you do with it all?" "I sold it," I replied. His mouth fell open. "You? Sold it?" "Piece by piece." Clara let out a hollow laugh. "Why? For what? What could you possibly need?" I looked at her, not with anger, but with clarity. "Space." She blinked, stunned. "Space? You destroyed your own home for space?" "No," I said softly. "I removed what did not belong to those who never saw it." She scoffed and turned to Ethan. "She's losing it. This is irrational." Ethan pointed toward the empty room as though it were proof of madness. "Do you understand what this looks like?" I stepped past him, into the hollow of the living room. My voice remained steady. It looks like a woman reclaiming her walls. He frowned. You didn't even tell me. You did not ask. That furniture was part of this house. No, I said. It was part of a home, and a home cannot be built on assumption. He ran a hand through his hair. Mom, you need to calm down. We're just trying to help you. Help, I repeated, tasting the word. Did help include spending my credit? Withdrawing my money? Deciding my paycheck should be yours? His head jerked up. Clara stiffened. Silence shifted. Now it was not mine. It was theirs. I don't know what you think you saw, Ethan began. Yet I was blind? I asked. Blind enough to feed you every week? Blind enough to open my door though you never knocked? Clara snapped. You're overreacting. Families share things. Family share plates, not identities, not bank accounts. I did not argue. I had not removed my furniture to host a debate. I had done it to ask one question, without words. What do you see when the comfort is gone? Ethan looked around the room again, panic blooming. Where are we supposed to sit? I met his eyes. If you come for chairs, you will miss them. If you come for me, I am here. He shook his head. You're being dramatic. I shook mine. I am being present. Clara threw her hands up. So what now? Are we supposed to eat on the floor? I felt something within me settle. Not like surrender, but like completion. The final stitch tied off. A dining table is not an obligation, Clara, I said quietly. It is an offering, and love is not automatic. It must be received to continue. She opened her mouth to retort, but no words surfaced. Ethan's voice dropped, low and wounded. Why are you doing this? I looked at my son, my only child, the boy I fed, the man I fed, still, and for the first time I answered him without fear, because I taught you that I would never leave, and you believed me. The words landed not as thunder, but as truth, heavy. I turned away, walking back toward the kitchen. Mom, he called after me, voice raw. We're your family. I paused at the doorway, then sit with me, without expecting to be served. They did not follow. The house did not echo with apology. It echoed with reckoning. I returned to my chair, lifted my tea, and let silence resume its place at the head of the room. I did not watch them leave, but I heard the tremor in the door when it closed. Not slammed, not gentle, uncertain. In the quiet that followed, I waited for regret. It did not come. What came instead was an unfamiliar companion, one I had not welcomed in decades, self-respect. I sat a long time in the empty room, letting it seep in. The walls no longer held furniture. They held boundaries. I did not need them to understand. I only needed them to see. That night, I washed my teacup, dried it carefully, and placed it in the cabinet. Before bed, I passed the living room one final time. No ghosts waited. No apologies either. I whispered to the dark, not in bitterness, but in closure. A mother is not a meal, and I am no longer setting the table. The Sunday after the empty house confrontation, the doorbell rang at 10 in the morning. No knocking, no call ahead. Just the sharp, familiar chime announcing someone who believed entry was a given. I opened the door to find Ethan, alone this time. No Clara. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets, eyes unreadable. I stepped back without inviting him in, but he entered anyway. He walked straight to the kitchen table, as though the ritual still held. I remained standing. There was no anger in his face now. Something colder had taken its place. Resolve. The kind I once admired when he studied late into the night for exams. But resolve, without empathy, curdles into something else. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. Crisp, prepared, legal. My stomach sank, not from surprise, but from recognition. Mom, he said calmly, we need to make things official. I did not sit. What things? This, he said, sliding a document across the table, is a power of attorney. It allows me to handle your finances. Your paycheck, bills, accounts, everything will be streamlined. For a moment, I saw him as a boy again, explaining his school project with pride, but the boy was gone. What stood before me was a man who believed care and control were the same word. He continued, "It's better this way. You won't have to worry. I'll make sure everything is paid on time. No more misunderstandings." Misunderstandings. That is what he called identity theft. Unauthorized withdrawals. Households treated like service stations. I looked down at the papers. My full name was printed neatly at the top, above blank lines waiting for my signature. Not a request for partnership, a request for surrender. He placed a pen beside it. "We can sign now. It'll take 5 minutes." I lifted the pen. His shoulders relaxed slightly, mistaking movement for agreement. I turned the paper slowly, scanning each clause. I wanted to understand precisely how thoroughly my autonomy was being erased. It was all there: joint authority, account transfers, asset control, and one line almost hidden among legal jargon, granting him the right to close accounts in my name. I looked up. "This gives you total control." He nodded. "That's simpler. You shouldn't handle these things anymore." "Shouldn't," I repeated quietly. "Or won't." He frowned. "Mom, this is for your own good." There it was, the phrase that raised me, fed me, aged me. For your own good. How many decisions in a woman's life are disguised beneath those 4 words? I twisted the pen in my fingers. "You think I'm incapable." "I think, Nyang," he said carefully, "that it's time I handled things. You've done enough." Done enough. As if motherhood were a shift that could be clocked out from, as if care had an expiration date but control did not. I lowered the pen to the paper. Ethan exhaled, relieved. "What are you doing?" he asked, confused, as I flipped the pen in my hand, replacing it with another lying nearby, a simple black pen I had used for grocery lists. He watched as I placed the tip over the line, then I set it down. "Mom," he urged, "go ahead." I looked at him, not with fury, but with finality. "I have signed everything you ever asked of me, Ethan. I signed permission slips, loan papers, and tuition checks. I signed over sleep, comfort, pride. I have signed away 32 years. Just not on paper." Silence spilled across the table. His jaw tightened. "Are you refusing?" "I am remembering," I replied. He stepped forward, incredulous. "You're being dramatic. This is just paperwork." "No," I said, "this is a transfer. Of power. Of voice." His composure cracked. "I'm trying to protect you." I shook my head slowly. Protection without respect is possession. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Anger flickered in his eyes, not fiery, icy. "You're making a mistake. You don't understand how difficult things are. You're not realistic." "I was realistic," I said, "when I worked 2 jobs, when I skipped meals so you wouldn't, when I paid interest on debts you never knew about. I understand reality. This," I tapped the paper, "is controlled." He stared at me with something close to disbelief, as if I had rewritten a role he assumed I would play until death. "What if you forget to pay something? What if you get scammed?" he pressed. "One question," I said. "Did you think to ask me if I needed help? Or did you simply decide that I would?" He said nothing. I gently closed the folder and slid it back across the table. "I will not sign." His hands curled. "Mom," I lifted my palm. "I'm done explaining." For the first time in his life, my silence did not defer. It was dismissed. He stared hard at me, perhaps waiting for the familiar softening, the backtracking, the inevitable surrender. It did not come. I stood, lifted my teacup, and walked to the sink. I rinsed it without looking back. Behind me, he gathered the papers with rigid movements. His voice, when it came, was cold. "You're going to regret this." I dried the cup. "Regret," I said, "is for things undone, not for things refused." He left without slamming the door. That, somehow, hurt more. When the house was quiet again, I opened the wooden box in my bedroom. I placed the unsigned document inside, beside the birthday cards, past innocence and present truth, pressed together. I did not cry. It was not grief. It was clarity. And clarity, I was learning, is the sharpest form of courage. 3 days passed after Ethan left with the power of attorney papers, 3 days in which the house did not echo with apology or explanation. I lived in the quiet as one might live with a healing wound, tender but resolute. Then, on the 4th morning, I did something I had never done in 63 years. I walked into a law office, Caldwell and Pierce, etched on the glass door. I hesitated before entering, feeling almost foolish. An aging mother seeking counsel against her own son. But there is a moment when even shame must step aside for survival. The receptionist, a young woman with tired eyes, asked softly, "Do you have an appointment, ma'am?" "No," I said, "but I have a question." Minutes later, I sat across from Mr. Benjamin Caldwell, a man in his 50s with silver at his temples and hands that folded gently, hands accustomed to hearing confessions framed as inquiries. "How can I help you, Mrs. Moreau?" he asked, not hurried. I opened my purse and placed the crumpled envelopes on his desk. Then, after a long breath, I laid down the unsigned power of attorney. I did not embellish. I did not tremble. I spoke facts. Fraud, withdrawal, authority taken without consent. He read in silence, eyes narrowing not in judgment, but in assessment. When he finished, he removed his glasses and said quietly, "Mrs. Moreau, what your son attempted is not caregiving. It is financial control." I felt my throat tighten. "I don't want to destroy him. I only want to protect what little is mine." He nodded. "You are not here to destroy him. You are here to reclaim yourself." I swallowed. "I keep asking, am I allowed to do that?" He leaned forward. "Allowed? Mrs. Moreau, listen carefully. You do not only have the right to protect yourself, you have the obligation to." Obligation. I had heard that word thousands of times, but always in relation to others. Obligation to family, to duty, to sacrifice. Not once, not ever, had someone tethered it to my own preservation. He continued, "What has been done to you is not a misunderstanding. It's exploitation. Intentionally or not, it is harmful, and harm, when ignored, becomes permission." I stared at the papers. Permission. I had unknowingly given so much of that away. He slid a blank notepad toward me. "This begins with documentation. Every statement, every letter, every withdrawal. We build proof, not to punish, but to protect." I nodded, slowly. "First," he said, "you must open a new bank account. Separate, private. Change your direct deposit. Your son must not have access." I felt a flicker of guilt. He will see that as betrayal. Mr. Caldwell met my eyes. "Mrs. Moreau, boundaries are not betrayal. Boundaries are protection, even of the relationship itself." I closed my eyes briefly. At that moment, I realized I had spent years guarding my son from consequences, not to save him, but to delay my own reckoning. "When do I begin?" I whispered. He handed me a pen. "You already have." That afternoon, I walked out with a folder containing forms, instructions, and a list of agencies. Bank, credit bureau, Social Security Administration. Each name represented a door I would have to knock on and say, "That is not me." It was both terrifying and liberating. For decades, every fight I endured was silent, internal. This time I would speak, on paper, in signatures, in revocations. I visited the bank first. The employee, a woman near my age with kind eyes, helped me open a new checking account. "Do you want paper statements or online?" she asked. I chose paper, proof you can hold. Next, I requested a replacement debit card. New number, new PIN, a clean start. I left with an envelope containing the card. It felt like a passport. Then, the credit bureau, forms for disputing fraudulent accounts. I sat in the lobby filling them out, line by line, each stroke of the pen a declaration. I am not asleep anymore. At one point, the man beside me muttered, "These companies always mix things up." I almost corrected him. But no, this was not a mix-up. This had a face, a name, and blood ties. Back home, I laid all the paperwork on the dining table, now stripped of its runner. I organized them into stacks. Fraudulent credit account, unauthorized withdrawal power of attorney demand. The evidence did not scream. It did not bleed. It simply existed, quiet, undeniable. I found an old 3-ring binder and began sliding each document into page protectors. The sound of plastic sheeting crinkling under my fingertips was strangely satisfying, like the rustle of armor being worn for the first time. Outside, a storm rolled in. Rain tapped against the windows in a steady metronome. I brewed tea. The kettle whistled long and low. The radio played softly in the other room, an instrumental piano that sounded like breath on glass. As I filed the final paper, I realized something profound. I was not collecting proof for anyone else. I was collecting proof for myself. Proof that what I felt was real, that I had not imagined the taking, that invisibility had not been my fault. I wrote a final page for the binder's front cover. For Lydia Moreau, evidence of awakening. I closed the cover and whispered, not prayer but promise, I will not vanish in service. That night I slept without dreaming. No ghosts wandered my halls. No footsteps demanded dinner. The house, though empty of furniture, felt full of presence, full of earned solitude. Morning came. Light crossed the bare floorboards in golden slabs. I brewed tea in my white porcelain pot, the one with the chipped spout Daniel once taped to repair. I poured into a single cup, placed it on the table, and sat, not as a host, as a witness, to the fact that self-protection is not selfishness. It is dignity, and dignity, once awakened, does not return to sleep. The first sign that Ethan had chosen a public stage came on a Wednesday morning, when my phone began to buzz against the kitchen table. At first, I assumed it was a wrong number or a delivery reminder. Then I saw the names on the screen, neighbors I had not spoken to in months, women from church who rarely text, a message from a former coworker with a single line, "Are you okay?" I opened the app I visited the least. The photo at the top of my feed made my breath catch. It was a picture of me holding Ethan when he was 5, both of us sunlit on a picnic blanket, his hair sticking up like wheat. Daniel had taken that photo. It is one of the few images where I look unguarded, mid-laugh, mouth open, eyes soft. The caption beneath it read, "Sometimes the people who raised you do the most damage. Toxic parents ruin peace." My name was not written, but it was not needed. The comments arrived like confetti. Proud of you for setting boundaries. Protect your mental health. Had to cut off my mom, too. Best decision. A string of heart emojis, prayers, flexed arms, advice offered by strangers who had never tasted my cooking or seen my hands after 12-hour shifts. I felt the first wave of heat rise to my face. Not anger exactly, disbelief. This was the oldest trick in a modern book. When facts threaten comfort, change the narrative and take a bow. I clicked into his profile. There were 3 posts in a row. The second was a selfie at a gym mirror, sweat on his brow, the caption reading, "Ni," doing the hard work of healing. The third was a shot of a dinner plate at an expensive restaurant, a glass of red wine tilted toward the camera, celebrating clean energy and healthy boundaries. The comments under that one stung the most. People cheering his courage, urging him to keep distance from negativity, telling him to rise above drama. My face was not there, yet I felt more exposed than if he had posted my address. I set the phone down. The room around me did not change. The binder on the table still held facts. The teapot still cooled beside it. In that space, I understood the difference between truth and narrative. Truth sits, narrative performs. My first instinct was to defend myself, to collect a lifetime of photographs and receipts and memories and hold them up to the light, to post a response that said, "No, this is not the story. Here is the story." A part of me drafted sentences in my head. Another part of me remembered the cost of public arguments that cannot be won. People who clap for a performance have already decided what show they bought tickets to. Marjorie called within the hour. "Do not engage," she said, before I could speak. "I was not going to," I answered, although I had considered it. "I know," she said, "but I also know what it feels like to be misnamed in front of an audience. Let him have the stage. You will have the record." After we hung up, I returned to the binder. I ran my fingers over the plastic sleeves. The sound was small, but it steadied me. I am not powerless if I am patient. The next day, he posted again, a carousel of interior photos of his home, new furniture, a rug much like the one Clara had once mocked in my living room, though twice the price. The caption, "Building a life on honesty and hard work, no more chaos." Someone commented, "It must be nice to cut toxic people out." He replied with a single heart. I did not cry. I will say that clearly for myself, because the old me would have. I brewed tea instead and carried the cup to the window. Outside, a child rode past on a scooter, cheeks flushed, hair wild. His mother jogged beside him, laughing, calling out, "Slow down!" I smiled, and then I felt the ache beneath the smile. The memory of telling Ethan the same thing on the sidewalk 25 years ago. Slow down. He had never listened. The world was always too small for his pace. That evening, I turned my phone face down. I cooked a simple dinner and ate it at the table without the runner. I said grace for myself, not a grand prayer, a sentence. Thank you for the strength to remain quiet. Silence is not the absence of words. It is the presence of self. On Friday, a church friend left a voicemail, gentle and loaded. "If you ever need to talk, Lydia." Another said, "Boundaries are hard. I am praying for your son." I stood at the sink and let the water run. The impulse to explain returned, strong and primal. We want to be known. We want to be named correctly. But I remembered Mr. Caldwell's voice. Boundaries protect the relationship, but they also protect the self. I would not step into a public arena where love was content. I wrote a line on a sticky note and placed it inside the binder cover. Let the world call me anything, as long as I am no longer living wrong to be loved. When the phone lit again, I did not reach for it. I reached for my pen. I made a list titled Quiet Tasks. Call the bank to confirm the new deposit path. Mail the credit dispute forms. Photocopy the hospital record with the date of the withdrawal. Buy a small safe for documents. Breathe. I completed each task as if clearing a path through a thicket. The work was not dramatic. It was ordinary. It was powerful. 2 days later, Ethan posted a story that made my hands shake, not with fear, but with the urge to speak. He shared a video montage of childhood photos, our faces flickering through summers and school plays set to soft piano. Over it, white text read, "Love means letting go of harm." I stood at the counter, watching the boy I raised become proof for a thesis against me. The editing was careful, almost tender. That was what made it cruel. I did not respond. I stood at the sink and washed an apple. I sliced it. I ate each piece slowly. I am practicing a new kind of resistance, one that will not turn me into the thing I am accused of. I will not rage. I will not beg. I will not teach a lesson on a platform that rewards humiliation. Instead, I called Mr. Caldwell and asked for the next step. He said, "We will file the disputes this week and prepare a letter. You have done exactly what you needed to, Lydia." After we hung up, I returned to the window. Evening had arrived. Lights blinked on in the houses across the street. Behind one curtain, a woman brushed a child's hair. In another, a couple danced in their kitchen. My life did not contain those scenes anymore. It contained something else. A quiet room, a steady breath, a binder of facts, a choice to remain whole. I picked up my phone at last and opened the app. I looked at the photo again, me and Ethan on the blanket in the sun. I remembered that day vividly. He had asked for watermelon and fallen asleep with his head on my lap. I tucked the corner of the blanket around his shoulders. Daniel called from behind the camera, "Look here." We did. I closed the app and placed the phone face down. Let them think what they want. I am not the name they gave me. I am the woman who finally learned that love without respect is performance. I will keep my voice for the places it matters. Paperwork, courtrooms, my own kitchen, my own prayers. Let the world call me anything. as long as I am no longer living wrong to be loved. There is a moment in every long conflict when words cease to matter, when truth leaves the stage of conversation and walks into the realm of consequence. For Ethan and me, that moment arrived in a beige government building with flickering lights and walls too thin to hold the weight of what was about to break. It began with a letter, not from me, but from the state. A notice of investigation, fraud, identity misuse, unauthorized withdrawal. It was no longer my accusation. It was the law's interest. I did not deliver it. I did not need to. Systems built for protection had been set in motion the day I filed with Mr. Caldwell. When Ethan received it, he did not call. He did not post. He appeared on my doorstep at dusk, face pale, folder in hand. I opened the door, stepping aside but not inviting him in. He entered anyway. Years of habit are not erased by paper. "Mom," he began, breath uneven. "We need to talk." He spread the letter on my table, the same table where he once snapped breadsticks and asked for extra sauce. His fingers trembled as he pointed. This could ruin me." I remained standing. "It is not mine to retract." His voice sharpened. "You did this. You went to someone. You started this." "No," I replied. I ended my silence. The rest followed. He paced, running his hands through his hair. "Do you even understand what an investigation means? My job? My reputation? This could destroy everything I built." A strange calm settled over me. "Everything?" I asked. "Or everything built on what was not yours?" He froze. "I didn't steal from you. I borrowed it. I helped pay your bills. My bills." My voice, though soft, cut through the air. "You paid with my name, my accounts, my credit." He shook his head violently. "You're twisting this. I took care of things because you wouldn't." I moved to the cabinet, retrieved the binder, and laid it between us. I opened it to the page marked by the withdrawal slip. "Do you remember where I was on this day?" I asked. He swallowed. "You were in the hospital." "Yes," I said, "breathing through an oxygen mask, and you were at a bank with my card." His eyes darted to the paper, then away. "I meant to pay it back." "Did you?" It slipped, Mom. I have expenses." I lifted another page. The credit card in my name. Months of charges from the furniture store that matched the rug in his living room, the gym membership, restaurant bills. His voice cracked. "I was going through a lot. You don't understand what pressure I'm under." Something inside me, the thread that once tied me to his pain, finally broke. "Pressure," I repeated. "I remember the pressure. Skipping dinner to afford your textbooks, working double shifts to cover your braces, sitting alone in a waiting room when your father died. That was pressure. This," I tapped the binder, "this is a choice." He slammed his hand on the table. "I am your son." I stepped back. "And I was your mother, not your purse, not your shield." He stared at me, stunned. For the first time, I saw something raw in his eyes. Not anger, not guilt. Fear. The fear of a man who realizes love will no longer save him from consequence. "Please," he whispered, "don't let this go further. You can stop this." I shook my head, slow and final. "I can no longer protect you from what you've done. That is the line between love and enabling." Tears collected in his eyes, though they did not fall. "So you're going to... what? Watch me be charged? Watch my life collapse?" I closed the binder. "I am not taking your life. I am returning mine." His voice hardened. "You'll regret this." I met his gaze steadily. "I have lived in regret. This is something else." He sat down heavily, burying his face in his hands. "I never thought you'd do this to me." "To you?" My voice was quiet. "I'm not doing anything to you, Ethan. I am simply no longer doing it for you." He looked up, desperate. "What do you want? Money? An apology?" I shook my head. "I want nothing. That is what you never understood. If I had wanted money, I would have taken it. If I had wanted pity, I would have begged. I only want space between us and my submission." He blinked, confused. What does that mean? I reached for the binder, sliding it to my side. It means that I am not taking back money. I am putting back boundaries. His jaw clenched. So that's it? You're abandoning me? I felt an ache, not sharp, but deep. No, I am releasing you. There is a difference. The clock on the wall ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, the world continued, unaware that in a single kitchen, 2 titles were dissolving. Mother, son, we were becoming what we had become long ago, 2 people, divided by truth. I picked up the binder and headed toward my bedroom. Mom, his voice was small, if this goes to court, they'll ask you to testify. I stopped in the doorway. I will speak, I said, only when I must. Not to wound you, to free myself. He reached out a hand, but did not cross the floor. We stood like that, distance measured not in steps, but in choices. My final words were not thunder, but stone. I am not taking back money. I am putting back boundaries. I turned and walked away. His voice rose behind me, pleading, then angry, then shattered. I did not turn around. A mother's back is a powerful thing. It is both history and verdict. I did not slam the door to my room. I closed it gently. On the other side, I heard nothing. For the first time in my life, I chose retreat not as surrender, but as sovereignty. There is a silence that wounds, and there is a silence that restores. After the final confrontation with Ethan, I came to understand the difference. One night, I stood in my kitchen with the binder of evidence closed and tucked safely away, and I asked myself a question I had not dared to face in years. If no one was coming to my door anymore, what door would I choose for myself? It was a startling thought. For decades, I had measured my days by someone else's arrival. Dinner at 7, holidays with hopes, phone calls that never came. But now, with no footsteps expected, my life did not feel empty. It felt open. I sold the house, not dramatically, not to make a point, simply because it held too many echoes of me waiting for Ethan, waiting for an apology, waiting for proof that sacrifice would be returned with tenderness. None of those things would arrive. And so, I chose not to remain where I had been abandoned. I found a small house 3 hours east, where the air tasted faintly of salt and mornings carried the hush of possibility. A 1-story cottage with weathered shingles, 2 modest bedrooms, and a porch facing the ocean. It had no grandeur. It had something better, a beginning. When I signed the deed, the agent asked, "Will anyone be joining you?" I answered without hesitation, "No, that is the point." She smiled, not pitying, but respectful. I moved with only what belonged to me. No phantom furniture, no relics of obligation, just clothes, books, my white teapot with the chipped spout, and the wooden box of childhood cards, kept not for Ethan's sake, but for my own history. My first night there, I stood in the center of the empty living room and listened. No sound of keys in the lock, no imagined footsteps, just the rhythmic hush of waves through the open window. For the first time in many years, I did not brace for interruption. The next morning, I brewed tea, only 1 cup. I set it on the windowsill and watched the horizon. Steam curled upward like a prayer I didn't need to speak. I walked through each room slowly, placing things by intention rather than tradition. My bed near the window to catch dawn. My bookshelves against the western wall where the light turns amber in the late afternoon. I left space where a couch might have been, where a table could go, but I did not fill it. Not because I lacked furniture, because I no longer owed anyone comfort. I planted wildflowers outside, nothing precious. Things that thrived without tending. Lupine, black-eyed Susan, Queen Anne's lace. Flowers that did not beg for permission to exist. 3 days after moving in, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Marjorie, holding a foil-wrapped loaf. Lemon cake, her specialty. She looked me up and down, not searching for damage, but for change. Finally, she nodded. "You look lighter, Lydia." I stepped aside. "Come in." She walked through the cottage, glancing around at the spare rooms. "Not finished decorating?" "Not planning to," I replied. She set the cake on the counter. "Good. A house should breathe." We sat at the table, 2 chairs, nothing more. She poured tea while I sliced the cake. We did not discuss Ethan. We did not need to. Instead, she asked, "Do you wake with dread or calm?" "Calm," I said. "Then you are healing." We ate in silence. Not the tense kind, but the peaceful kind, where each bite tasted of decision rather than duty. Before leaving, she touched the wooden box on my shelf. "Keeping that?" "Yes," I said. "Proof that I once loved. Proof that I still can." After she left, I walked to the shore. The tide was low, revealing wet sand that held every footprint like a confession. I did not write my name. I simply stood there, letting the wind unfasten the last remaining knots inside me. I did not wonder if Ethan would ever call. That question belonged to another version of me. I only wondered what book I would read next, whether I would bake bread that week, if I would paint the porch blue or leave it weathered. Healing, I learned, is not grand. It is choosing breakfast because you are hungry, not because someone else is coming. That evening, I lit a single candle, not for grief, for presence. As I washed my cup, a thought arrived. Not loud, but clear. Freedom is not the absence of love. It is the refusal to beg for it. I dried the teapot, placed it gently on the windowsill, and whispered to the empty kitchen, not in sorrow, but in affirmation. No one is waiting at my door, and I am no longer standing at theirs. People often tell me that time heals everything. I've learned that time, by itself, heals nothing. What heals is choice. Choice to stay. Choice to leave. Choice to love differently. Not with open doors, but with open eyes. It has been 7 months since I moved to the coastal house. Seasons have changed. The wildflowers I planted in spring have wilted and returned in autumn, tougher, deeper rooted. I live quietly now. Some mornings I walk to the pier with my tea and watch fishermen cast lines into an ocean that promises nothing. There is peace in an honest horizon. Sometimes women from nearby houses stop to chat. They ask the usual questions. Do you live alone? Do you have family nearby? I answer gently, yes and no. They don't pry. They sense the rest of the story, lives behind a door I no longer open to strangers. Word travels, though. Not facts, but shape. Some say I'm estranged. Some say I'm retiring. Some say I'm ill. Gossip fills the places where silence is not understood. I don't correct it. Explanation belongs to those seeking permission. I am no longer seeking permission to exist. A few have asked directly, do you miss him? Do you still love your son? Here is the truth. I love the boy who once held my lace table runner and said he wanted to keep it because it smelled like me. But the man who stood in that empty room demanding my paycheck, him I do not know. Love does not blind me anymore. It does not require me to vanish to prove its depth. I can hold tenderness for what was and still refuse to be harmed by what is. In my wooden box, I still keep his childhood cards, not as proof of him, as proof of me, of the woman who gave everything she could. I open them on rare nights, not to ache, but to remember I was capable of devotion. That part of me still lives, but devotion without dignity is not love. It is a sacrifice without an altar. Ethan has not visited. He sent 3 letters. The first was blame. The second was bargaining. The third was something closer to grief. I did not answer. Letters addressed only to guilt are not invitations to healing. If he ever writes to the woman I am now, not the servant I once was, I will consider replying. But reconciliation without recognition is only repetition. Sometimes I am asked if I fear dying alone. I smile. I did not fear dying alone. What I feared deeply was dying unseen, surrounded by people who consumed my presence but never truly witnessed me. I would rather leave this world with 1 teacup in the sink and my name intact than with a table full of guests who believe I owe them bread. Do I wonder if Ethan regrets? Yes, but regret is not my jurisdiction. Thus, consequence is not cruelty. He is the most honest teacher we have ever met. I think about something Mr. Caldwell said the day I filed the final document. Love with boundaries is still love. Love without boundaries is self-erasure. I wish I had heard it at 30. I am grateful I heard it at 63. I have not lost my son. I have lost only the illusion that I must disappear to keep him. There is a difference between closing a door and barricading it. I have not barricaded mine. If he knocks as a man ready to see me, I will answer. But if he comes with expectation instead of empathy, he will find a locked door. And that lock is not punishment. It is protection of what I finally reclaimed. My days are small now, by design. I read, I bake, I mend things I choose to mend, like quilt corners and fraying sleeves, not people who do not wish to be whole. I speak more to the ocean than to society. The ocean never asks me to shrink. Some evenings, I write in a journal, not about pain, but about presence. One entry reads, I am not healed, I am healing, and healing is not a destination, it is a daily refusal to return to what broke me. Healing, I have discovered, is quiet. It does not announce victory, it whispers boundaries. One afternoon, Marjorie visited again, bringing peach preserves. She placed them on the counter and looked around my small, uncluttered space. You kept the teapot, she said. I did, I answered. It pours just enough for one. She nodded. You look restful. I am, I said. She did not ask about Ethan. She has outgrown voyeurism. We sat with tea until the sky turned coral, saying little. Some friendships require no explanation, only witness. Later that night, I opened the window and let the sea air in. I spoke to no one and to everyone. I did not lose my son. I simply stopped losing myself. A mother's love is not proven by how much she endures. It is measured by how clearly she remembers her own worth while loving. I forgot once. I remember now. If my story travels, let it go not as a scandal, but as a signal to every woman who serves in silence, who confuses erasure with devotion. You are not wrong for wanting to be seen. You are not cruel for closing the door. You are not broken for choosing peace. And if you, listening to this, are a mother, what would you do? I do not ask for agreement. I do not ask for praise. I ask only this. Tell me your story. I have told mine, not to be right, but to be free.